Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Today's topic is understanding and caring for persons with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. Thank you for joining us today for this complimentary webinar brought to you through a collaboration of sponsors, O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices Hospice and Palliative Services, Caring Companions at Home, as well as Alzheimer's Orange County. My name is Jasmine. I am the Director of Education here at Alzheimer's Orange County, and I'll be your host today. Our sponsors are providing these webinars to you as a service to the community on topics that are beneficial for anyone who cares for and works with older adults. We hope you find today's presentation informative and useful. I would like to introduce our speaker today, Kim Bailey. Kim has worked in the field of gerontology as a lecturer, aging expert for 30 years. She has a Master's of Science in Gerontology and a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology, both from CSUF. She is a program and education specialist here at Alzheimer's Orange County. She's responsible for providing programs, education, families, and professionals throughout the community. She has a long history of academic, corporate, and nonprofit experience. So let's turn it over to Kim.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. Thank you, Jasmine, for getting us off to a good start and for the nice introduction. We are going to talk about kind of a unique topic today, and it is really about when aging and Alzheimer's and Down syndrome intersect. And so it's a little bit different type of subject matter than some of our attendees are used to hearing, but I'm hoping it'll be informative, and it's something I believe we all need to know about it. It's actually been a part of my job description here at ALS OC for the last 10 years, and I have been honored to co-facilitate a support group during that whole time for families who are caring for an adult son or daughter, or perhaps a sibling with Down syndrome who's aging and either showing signs of symptoms or has already been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And so, and the reason that's so critical is because aging is a relatively new phenomenon in this community. For example, back in 1960, the average life expectancy for someone with Down syndrome was 10 years old. And you contrast that with today, where the life expectancy is 60 years old. And so, unfortunately, as people age in this disease, they are at a very high risk for the disease, and we'll talk about that today. But before we do, I want to acknowledge some of our collaborators. In addition to the sponsors of this webinar, we have some contributors. One is the Association for Community Living, who has provided grants for us to provide these projects having to do with Down syndrome and aging. And then we also have the OMED Society, and they are the Multicultural Institute for Development here in Orange County. And I'll tell you a little bit about them before we end today. So our thanks again to our sponsors of our monthly series and to our collaborators for today's topic. I'll also mention that NTG, the National Task Force, they are a national consortium of experts in Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. So they include educators, researchers, physicians, etc. And they, in fact, are responsible for most of the curriculum that you'll see in today's lecture. So here's what we want to be able to do today. I want to give everybody or help everybody to develop a better understanding of Alzheimer's disease and dementia, as well as how it impacts persons living with IDD. And IDD stands for individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities. So we'll use the we'll use shorthand for that, IDD, and then we'll talk about Alzheimer's disease. We'll refer to that as ADD. Or as AD. We'll also be sharing some tips and tools so that you can better connect and communicate with individuals who are living with IDD and dementia. We'll understand how to address some of the challenging behaviors that come into play as people develop symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. And I'll just go over some of the key concepts and best practices for use in caring for clients, as well as how we care for the families. And for all of you longtime providers, much of this will sound very familiar because many of the same tenets and best practices are in play when caring in the dementia community, and that extends to when we're caring for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So before I'm going to, before I get into the goals and objectives, I want to just kind of set the stage for our discussion today by giving you some background information. So I already mentioned that life expectancy in the 60s was 10 years old. And so, a lot of the folks that I've seen in my support group, they were told when their son or daughter was born with Down syndrome that they should just institutionalize them, that they would never thrive, that they would probably die. And so, the early parents, were really out there without any resources or information. And there was historically just this overall poor treatment of individuals born with Down syndrome and other types of IDD. So now, as we fast forward, we see that these lifespans, as I indicated, have increased dramatically for people living with IDD. It kind of mirrors what's happened in the general population, over these last decades. So the good news is that, with better understanding and improved healthcare, more programs and opportunities, all of that kind of leads to a better quality of life now. But it doesn't change the way many of these folks, were initially treated. And the other caveat is that now individuals with Down syndrome can expect to live well into their 60s, depending on, their comorbidities. However, they sort of exist with this dark cloud over their head because their risk for Alzheimer's dramatically increases as they age. And in fact, individuals living with Down syndrome, 100% of them are found to have the characteristic pathology of Alzheimer's disease in their brains upon autopsy. So they all develop the plaques and tangles, but the good news is that they do not all develop Alzheimer's. So, this is just a little graphic to kind of show you, kind of point out this perfect storm of negative factors that, sort of influence their quality of life and their health outcomes. So, in the beginning, they had a lot of problems with even getting adequate health services. Families were dealing with medical personnel who really had no familiar with Down syndrome or autism or any of the other intellectual and developmental disabilities. There were also a lot of, what we would call now age-associated comorbidities or pathologies. So folks born with Down syndrome are very at a high risk for having heart defects. Many have cardiovascular disease. They're prone toward obesity, hyperthyroidism. They've got upper GI problems, frequently have sleep apnea, and then frequently go on to develop dementia. So they've got sort of all of those other strikes against them. And those pathologies were not well treated in the early days. And then if you sort of couple that with some lifestyle factors that we now know are really critical for all of us, there was sort of an overall lack of exercise. Folks dealt with a lot of stigma. They weren't out in the community a lot, in earlier days. And then they had, some poor nutrition going for them, some bad eating habits. And so there we saw the obesity, et cetera. So a lot of that is changing now as we all in the field start to talk more and more about prevention of Alzheimer's disease as being, sort of correlated with high levels of exercise, the right kind of diet, perhaps a Mediterranean diet, cognitive stimulation, social engagement, being a part of the community, etc. So all of those are lifestyle factors which we can change, we can, have control over now if we're caring for someone with Down syndrome, but not so in the past. So against that backdrop, I just want to go over just a little overview of dementia in general, which many of you have heard and know all about. But for those that have not, we want to use dementia as a broad term. We call it often an umbrella term, which describes any progressive degenerative brain impairment that is going to affect memory, thinking, and judgment. And in the general population or the neurotypical population, you typically see it start to affect people in later life, although we do, of course, have some young onset folks, where the disease might start in their 40s or 50s. But generally, we think of Alzheimer's disease in terms of, a later stage development in life. I think currently we say 1 in 10 over the age of 65, and then it goes up radically to, maybe 1 in 2 over the age of 85. So, but it's going to be different for people with Down syndrome because they age prematurely and they don't live as long as the neurotypical population. So we'll re-emphasize that as we go along. Dementia can be caused by many things. There's a whole list of things that are treatable, including, maybe someone's on the wrong meds, maybe they've got clinical depression, maybe they've got some kind of an infection. They could have a dramatic B12 deficiency, they could be dehydrated. So there's a whole host of things that can cause dementia-like symptoms. But what we're talking about today are the irreversible ones, primarily Alzheimer's disease, although there are many other kinds of dementia as well. What's happening in Down syndrome is that chromosome 21, which Down syndrome people have an extra copy of, is the chromosome that expresses amyloid. And we know amyloid to be the culprit, and we think it's one of the culprits in Alzheimer's disease. So that chromosome 21 plays a very key role in the relationship between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease, since it's got that gene that's producing that excessive amount, and because of the extra copy, even more excessive amount of amyloid, which is a key product, a key protein that's involved with brain changes associated with Alzheimer's. So we know that Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. It usually has a gradual onset in the neurotypical population. It involves people being unable to remember new information. They can remember things that happened a very long time ago, but they're having difficulty, remembering if someone visited today or if they had breakfast already this morning. It impairs their general activities, their learning, their activities of daily living, and it involves generalized brain atrophy or shrinkage because it involves death of brain tissue caused by these amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles that are forming in the brain. So this is a look, and many of you have seen, brain slides that show the difference between a normal brain and an Alzheimer's brain. But this is a side-by-side comparison of a Down syndrome brain. And so on the left, you see the healthy Down syndrome brain, and on the right, you see the one with advanced Alzheimer's. And it's very clear that there's been some incredible change going on. There's a lot of atrophy. There's a lot of gaps in areas that are now filled with fluid, used to be filled with cells, etc. So it's kind of a dramatic illustration of the impact that Alzheimer's disease has on the brain. So what does this look like? in individuals living with Down syndrome. Quite a few of us online today are experts in what it looks like in the general population. And there's a lot of commonality, but there's a couple of things that stand out that I really want to highlight for you. And one is seizure activity that was not present before. So adulthood onset seizures are often a hallmark that Alzheimer's is present. Also behavioral changes, which, I think we're all used to hearing about, but I think I want to make a point about how difficult that really is for caregivers and family members of someone living with Down syndrome. I hate to be stereotypical or to make generalizations, but in general, people living with Down syndromes are amazingly friendly, affectionate, good-natured, they're hardworking, they're cooperative, they want to please, they live to please you, and they love you. And so when families start to see things like irritability, resistance, increased, agitation, withdrawal from social activities, those kinds of symptoms that are hallmarks of the disease, it is especially painful and hurtful, and they don't understand. And so you've got these behavioral changes, you've got these seizures that are present and they're new on the scene. You may also, unlike the neurotypical onset of Alzheimer's, you're going to see some changes pretty quickly in coordination and walking. So gait changes. You might, an example, we hear from some families, it's like, oh, he doesn't want to go to the day center anymore. We don't understand it. And it turns out he or she is having trouble stepping up onto the step to get onto the bus. It's not really about not wanting to go, but about gait changes. What else? Just, decline in focus and decreased enthusiasm for, usual activities, sadness, fearfulness, increased anxiety, and more restlessness and perhaps sleep disturbances. So all hallmarks, all early symptoms of dementia in individuals who are living with Down syndrome. And so if you are a parent or a sibling or a worker, if you are working in the field, the IDD field, or if you are an administrator, you're going to need to adopt a change in philosophy when your loved one or your client develops Alzheimer's disease. Whereas in the past, you're always working with them to gain new skills or to perfect new skills or to maintain new skills. Now we're going into another mode of operating. We're going to expect the pretty sudden, inevitable loss of skills. And so our focus is going to be on just helping people maintain, be safe, be comfortable, etc. So it's really a paradigm shift, and I'm emphasizing it now because it goes against the grain for a lot of folks that are either working in the IDD field or working as a family member with their loved one. People with Down syndrome are proud of the skills that they have. They like to show them off. So we need to anticipate and understand that there's going to be a steep decline. And it's not going to take place gradually over the years like it does in the general population. It's going to happen fairly quickly over the next few years. So we focus not on gaining skills or gaining ground, but on just helping people be comfortable and safe as they lose their skills. So let's start to talk a little bit. I talked a little bit about dementia in general. I talked about what it looks like in early stage. Now let's focus on that care that I was just talking about. And so here is where some of this is going to sound very familiar to you. And it's these skills, if you haven't already learned them, will come in handy if you are caring for someone with IDD and AD. So first of all, we're going to focus on communication because, for all of us, communicating our own needs and our wants and desires and wishes, that is what gives us a sense of identity, and it is what gives us a quality of life. And so we know that communication is more than verbal, and especially with this population that we're talking about, we're going to need to move to nonverbal, anything like, gestures, our body language, our smiles, our facial expression, when we touch people, how that feels, all of that is important as the disease progresses, because language skills will be lost, and, over a relatively short period of time. So I'm going to talk about body language a little bit, just because it's interesting to me that, people who are living with dementia and IDD are still pretty darn good at reading your body language and that of others. So we want to always really present as open and non-threatening. We never assume that the person knows who we are. So if I'm working with someone, it always starts with, "Hey, it's Kim. I've come to spend some time with you." I just don't make an assumption that they know who I am. I try to remain patient and calm throughout my interaction. Personal space is an issue. So you don't want to get right up in somebody's face, and you also don't want to be standing behind them or hovering over them, because all of this can feel threatening to a person who now has dementia. We want to try to stay at or below their eye level. And of course, as always, we want to make sure we've got their attention before we try to interact with them. We're going to keep smiling the whole time. We're going to speak calmly and slowly, and enunciate well, and take our time in relaying our words, and then in waiting for expression to come back. So, and the sense of touch I mentioned, we use that when it's appropriate. Of course, it's appropriate for family members, but if we're professionals working in the field, perhaps if we pat someone's hand or touch their shoulder, not behind their back, but, so that they can see what we're doing, that could be all right, but it just varies from client to client. So we don't say no. Don't ever say no. We say yes, and then we, redirect or we move on in another way. But if we say no, we're going to be involved in a fight, and we don't want that. And we don't argue. And by that, I mean, we don't try to reason. We don't go into some lengthy explanation or dialogue with a person who has lost their ability to really process thoughts in a logical manner. It makes no sense to have that type of an argument with someone. All it does is escalate their frustration and their fear, and even, make them angry with us, which we definitely don't want. So really our goal is to not be correct. Look at the little example here. Donna is like telling someone at her day center that she's a movie star. The best thing to do is to agree with her. It doesn't hurt anyone to let them live in a different reality if it makes them happier. Maybe she always wanted to be a movie star. So now's a chance for us to let her live out her dreams. Again, the goal is not to be correct and not to correct. If they think it's Friday, that's fine. If, they think it's nighttime, that's fine. We're going to work around their gaps in reality instead of expecting them to come back to our reality. And just keep in mind, as it says here on this slide, this person is experiencing a decline in their functioning skills. But at the same time, there's an increase in their emotional reactions. So when you've got that kind of push play going on, or push and pull going on, you have to be very careful not to argue. If you don't insist, they can't resist. I'm very fond of saying that. And feelings are more important than facts. It's their reality. and it's up to us. They can't change. It's up to us to enter their reality. So we do that through validation. When we use that method, it builds empathy. It lays the groundwork for trust. And hopefully it decreases their fears and their anxieties. And just let me say something about fear and anxiety. That's just happening all the time once people have Alzheimer's disease, because their thoughts are even more jumbled. And of course, this all depends on what was their baseline before Alzheimer's disease. It could be that it was quite low, or they could have been very high functioning. But you're going to see that increase in confusion and anxiety, and it's up to us to mitigate that. And we can do it. We can do it for them by entering their reality, reminiscing with them, matching their emotions, not arguing, going with the flow, being patient, all of those wonderful things. So you're working at the day center or at the day program, and Tom comes up and says, "Oh, my grandmother was here today." And you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, wow, his grandma died. I know she died a year ago." So instead of saying, "Oh, what are you thinking of? Your grandmother died, didn't she? Didn't we all go to the funeral?" You just simply say, "That is wonderful. I know you love her very much. Would you like to go would you like to go try an activity with me?" So you validate, you don't correct, and then you redirect. And that's sort of the name of the game when it comes to effective communication and strategies with folks with IDD and AD. You reduce fear by acknowledging what you perceive to be the underlying emotion. And you have to get good at reading them, because they're going to lose their ability to express and cope with their fears. So you're going to see more of that, which calls upon you to be more reassuring, more patient, and just really more on top of things, in terms of assessment. You're looking at them, you're looking at their expression, you're trying to figure out, what's going on. And, that person is probably could even be losing their own ability to self-soothe. They may have come with a lot of self-soothing behaviors, but those are fading in the face of Alzheimer's disease. So again, we step in, we reassure the person, we respond to the emotion that we're seeing. A few more tips, I already mentioned, make sure they're attending and you've got their attention. Don't reason or argue. Use short sentences with yes, no answers instead of, you're a family member and you open the closet, you say, "What do you want to wear today?" That's like a huge question for someone who's confused. So, do you want to wear the red shirt? Yes. Or do you want to wear the blue shirt? No. You're still giving people choice, but you're narrowing sort of the field for them. Stay calm, allow lots of extra time, and just realize that if you raise your voice, which is kind of inevitable because it's frustrating and you're human, but just know that a loud voice is going to be interpreted by them as you're angry. They'll say you're angry. I know I was working with a sibling who was taking care of her sister with Alzheimer's disease, and her sister was fond of like taking everything out of her closet and laying all her clothes all over the room and all over the bed. And one day she did this like 5 times. And each time Gil was really patient and helped her put them away and didn't show a lot of, frustration. But I think the 5th time it was, she said, "Why are you doing this? You're trying to drive me crazy." She made some kind of high, voice, frustrated remark. And her sister just looked at her and said, "Why are you angry with me? What did I do?" And it was very sad. So they hear a loud voice, they're going to interpret that as anger. And we don't want that to happen. We want to respond to their emotions. We want to continually distract and redirect. And if something's not going well, we don't push, we step away, and we can try again in a few minutes. and we might be successful. We kind of talked a little bit about communication, which really lays a nice foundation for how we're going to deal with some of the common behavioral expressions that we will see in our folks with IDD and AD. And here's a whole list of them. And of course, I have to tell you, as I always do, whether I'm talking about Down syndrome or the general population, every person is different, and they are going to go through this journey in their own way and in their own time. And so some folks may get all of these symptoms or none of the above, excuse me. But in general, we see a lot of pacing, maybe some wandering, repetitive questions because their short-term memory is so impaired. That rummaging that I mentioned in my example, taking things out of the closet, putting them in different places, hoarding, maybe hiding some of their things. You will see typically some verbal outbursts, agitation, paranoia. Somebody took my lunch, or somebody took my book. Hallucinations, seeing things that aren't there, or delusions, believing things that aren't true. The sleep-wake cycle disorders, sundowning, resistance, etc., and those hurtful changes in personality that I discussed earlier. So the first thing I say to do is to ask yourself, who is this behavior a problem for? Because we know that behaviors can exist on a range of, just annoying all the way up to seriously, have potential for serious harm. So we sort of assess, is this a minor behavior or major? And then is this a problem for them or is it for me? So here, the example here is, they're walking around with 6 layers of clothes on. So that might be really annoying, that might be annoying to me. But if I get in there and try to get them to remove some of that clothing, they might become resistant and upset. And so maybe, just maybe, it's best to ignore the behavior. The question that you have to ask yourself when you're considering ignoring a behavior is you want to make sure that the behavior doesn't have the potential for harm for either the individual or for another. So if it's not like they're not a danger to themselves or others, and they're doing something repetitive, or who knows, any of the things that we just saw on the list, ask yourself, can we just accommodate this behavior? Would it be easier just to accommodate it? We can also, sort of try to figure out, is there a trigger for this behavior, something that we can do beforehand? Is there a pattern, things happening before, things happening after? Maybe a certain person, are they a trigger for behavior? Does it only happen with certain people? What's been tried in the past? So, and then most importantly, what do we know about this person's life history? What do we know about their life history? So maybe they've been on the job, doing a job for many, many years, and it involves certain tasks that, they're not part of their life anymore, but you're seeing them try to do those things in a repetitive manner. I mean, that makes perfect sense because that was part of their daily routine. So you just sort of hone your skills of assessment when you're evaluating each and every behavior that you see. And I know that sounds like a lot, but again, if you just sort of tell yourself, let's first of all figure out if this is something that's dangerous. If it's not, maybe we can ignore it. If we don't want to ignore it, maybe we can kind of drill down into why it's happening and make some change. So, for example, very often when you see a new behavior, it's the result of pain or discomfort. And so that's a huge, topic. That could be anything from this person has a bladder infection to this person has a pebble in their shoe or a backache, or they're too hot or they're too cold, some kind of discomfort, and even they might be sick. that could be triggering behavior. It could be the result of being in a new or unfamiliar environment or routine. And you might say to yourself, well, what's new about this environment? It's where they live. It might not look the same to them or feel the same once they have Alzheimer's. And then finally, we may be asking them to do something that is just too hard for them now. Maybe they did this skill all their lives, but now with Alzheimer's, remember what I said? They're going to have a decline in their skills. It's going to be steep. So we might ask them to do something they've always done and they don't remember the steps anymore. And that is embarrassing them. They're feeling shame. They're feeling frustration. They may be feeling anger. So these are all just kind of part of the clues that we have to sort of pedal through in order to come at some solutions. And in all things, we know that they can't change, but we can. So we tell ourselves, these behaviors are because they have a brain disease. They have more brain disease on top of their already existing condition. So that makes it twice as hard for them to navigate. And if we really try to change or control their behavior, we are very often going to meet with resistance. So as I said, try to accommodate the behavior instead of controlling it. I had in the support group, I had a woman and her daughter wouldn't sleep in the bed and she kept getting up and they put her back to bed and she'd get up again. And I finally said, let her sleep on the floor. For some reason, she's afraid, or just put the mattress on the floor. So there's always ways we can accommodate things. We can change our own behavior, or as I just suggested, change the physical environment. We can distract and redirect when we see a behavior. Maybe we use a favorite food or a favorite activity to just sort of get them thinking in a different direction. So here's an example. Joe is like out of control, agitated. He thinks he's going to miss his bus and he's trying to get to work and he's not going to miss his bus. He's got plenty of time. But instead of saying, Joe, you're wrong, you've got plenty of time, relax, calm down, you just agree with him. Okay, Joe, but guess what? I just made breakfast. Let's eat together and then I'll make sure you catch the bus. I want to talk a little bit about failure-free activities because I've always said that I think activities are the best way to intervene with problem behavioral expressions. So we want to use failure-free, and all that means is that these are activities that have been adapted to meet that person where they are now in their illness. So maybe they, oh gosh, of course my mind is blank. I'm trying to think of an activity. Whatever activities that they like may be too high level for them now. And so we want to do what we call right sizing. So as time goes on, we're going to make these very simple and we're going to walk people through them step by step. So our focus is going to be on simple things that really help to relieve boredom and frustration and, promote, of course, quality of life, self-esteem, etc. So that plan for failure-free activities includes limiting choices because too much is way too much and is overwhelming. We want to provide gentle guidance. We want to break steps down into simple steps and give simple directions. And if we see that it's not working, we're not going to keep trying. We're going to redirect into another activity. So let me just give you some examples. I've got a couple of screens here. Examples of activities. Music is a hit at any stage of the illness. So enjoying favorite music together, perhaps dancing together. Reminiscing, telling, memories from before. Gardening, just, filling bird feeders, sitting and watching the birds, sitting in the sun, getting a little vitamin D, taking walks, visiting with family. You can do maybe some hand massage or shoulder massage with maybe some scented oils. And you can do art, especially tactile, finger painting, as long as it's non-toxic materials. Art and music are fabulous. And then as they become more impaired, you really want to appeal to their sensory or their sensory input or stimulation. You can use things like hanging mobiles, like the kind that you used for them when they were a baby over the crib. They're sparkly and fun to watch. Fish tanks are great. There were studies done years ago that showed that for Alzheimer folks, sitting and looking at an aquarium helps to calm and soothe them and reduces problem behaviors. Cuddly toys. We now have these electronic pet companions that sort of act like real animals. The cats meow and turn over and raise their paws up, and dogs bark and are very friendly. Or you could use stuffed animals. Just that feeling of fresh air and sunshine on their face is good for later stage. Rummaging around in a drawer. Maybe you have a special drawer with different items that have different tactile feel to them, different textures. Bean bags, and I like the bean bags that are illustrated here because they are cloth and soft, and they are fun to squish. You can also use those squishy, what do you call those? Those balls for use for squeezing, and then repetitive activities such as sweeping or dusting, etc. I wanted to mention a little bit of information for professionals who are online with us today and how they can better support family members. So first of all, I want to mention that as I've gotten out into a lot of the group homes where people with IDD and AD are living, I've been really impressed with how long people have been working in the field with relatively little turnover. So you may be a professional that's been working with someone for a very long time, and you've really become like family. But when you're working with a family, remember to keep open the lines of communication. You can be now an educator about the diagnostic process. So I'll pause right here and tell you that most people with Down syndrome need to have a baseline memory screening by the age of 40 because many of them have full-blown symptoms by 50. So this is something that you know a little bit about now, and you can maybe talk to family members, and I'm going to show you in just a minute a resource for diagnosis that we have right here in Orange County. So, kind of being in the role of advocate for clients as well as educator is good. And you can provide some critical listening and support for the family members. You can refer them to us or other local Alzheimer's organizations. And if they're not already involved in the regional center, the regional center, you can refer them to regional center because they are the vendors for a lot of the services that they might be needing. In our area, as mentioned at the beginning, we have a specialized monthly support group, and it's available in person on the third Friday of every month. I'm sorry, the second Friday of every month at the Down Syndrome Association, and also online. So you can refer people to me for information about that, the support group, as well as educational classes like the one that you're taking right now. You can get their input and opinions as things are changing. You want to make sure you maintain a good relationship, be sensitive to their feelings, and choose your words carefully. And let me give you a major example of that. So the reality of Alzheimer's disease in the Down syndrome life is that the progression will last about 5 years. That is a very different timeline than we see in the general population. In the general population, people are living with Alzheimer's anywhere from 5 to 20 years, or maybe to narrow it a bit more, I might say 8 to 12 years. So it moves pretty slowly. And it's different for everyone. But in our Down syndrome population, it's going to be a steep decline, and it usually lasts for about 5 years. So that's an example of something that you might not want to share with families that could come out in an insensitive way. But you can certainly refer them to me or our organization for any and all questions about the disease, etc. So before I end, I want to share a message from a father that has some critical information in it. So please listen.
My daughter has Down syndrome, and folks with Down syndrome develop Alzheimer's and dementia earlier. This is the first generation where parents with kids with Down syndrome will probably predecease their kids. Who's going to take care of my kid if she develops dementia early? All the more reason to get involved in the research. I don't know if it'll be in time to help my daughter, but there's a whole bunch of folks out there with Down syndrome that could benefit from a cure.
Okay, so here we were talking, the film was talking about the value of being involved in research. And so this is something you can educate families about. The fact that we at UCI Mind, which is affiliated with the university, there is a UCI Down syndrome program, and the information is on your screen, and folks can get involved with them early on so that an evaluation or diagnosis can be attempted, as I mentioned, around age 40, and then the opportunity is there to participate in groundbreaking research. And so that is a local resource that we're very proud of. I also want to mention again our partner in this particular class, the OMED Multicultural Institute for Development. They are, in fact, dedicated to providing affordable mental health care as well as social services in the diverse communities of Orange County. So their primary language is actually, well, it's Farsi and English, but they also they provide services in a variety of other languages as well. So another great resource, and they've been our partner in this grant, as I mentioned. And then, of course, we have the education and support that we are providing here at Alzheimer's Orange County through the generosity of a grant funded by the Association for Community Living. So that is the end of my presentation, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jasmine.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim. That was very, very great presentation. It was wonderful. Thank you. We want to remind everyone of the importance of being aware of implicit bias or unconscious stereotypes as we care for others. Best practice is a person-centered approach where we view each person that we care for as an individual with unique needs and preferences, treat them with dignity and respect, even when they are very different from ourselves. If we always listen carefully and respectfully, so that we understand their perspectives, values, and preferences, we can build trust and provide the highest quality of care. Now, if you have any questions for Kim, please be sure to type them into the chat box in your taskbar. We do have questions, so please stay with us. But before we get into the Q&A, if we do run past 12:30, which is, it's already 12:25, so you're welcome to remain online to ask your question or listen to the answers. If you need to leave the webinar, you can, but just remember, if you want the CE credit, you need to be online for 60 minutes. Also, I want to take this time to thank our sponsors one more time for making this presentation possible. The O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices Hospice and Palliative Services, and Caring Companions at Home. And don't forget about next month's webinar on April 11th, which will be on the topic of chronic mental illness and the risk for dementia. All right, so let's get to our questions.
That's going to be a great topic next month, Jasmine.
I'm
looking forward to that.
Yeah. Okay. Find the first question. What if the person with IDD has a very negative reality?
We just have to learn to adjust to that. We can do anything. We can try different approaches. Like I mentioned, we can redirect them, try to introduce activities to them that they love. It could even be food that they love, people they love. But when it comes down to it, if that is their presentation and it's unchanging, then we need to live with it. That, yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
It just reinforces what I said earlier, which is we can't expect them to change, but we know we can change. So it's on us.
Right. Here's a good one. Well, they're all good questions, but are people with Down syndrome affected by other types of dementia, such as Lewy body dementia or frontal temporal dementia?
Okay. So as a rule, no. I mean, most of them get Alzheimer's disease. However, when we're talking about the broad community of people living with intellectual and developmental disabilities, they can get any of those illnesses. Again, Alzheimer's is the primary one. Let me also mention, while we're on the topic of the other IDD populations, their prevalence rate is the same as the general population. The one that I mentioned earlier, the 1 in 10, or maybe the 1 in 2 for 85 plus, it's only in the Down syndrome population that we see this radical risk for Alzheimer's disease. So the answer to the question is it's primarily AD.
Okay.
But we can see others.
All right. Can people living with Down syndrome and AD attend regular adult day health centers?
They can. They can. More and more of our CBEST programs have been trained to adapt to this population. We're seeing increasing numbers. And then we also have a lot of specialty programs in Orange County, like Easter Seals and some of the others. Oh my gosh, I'm not thinking of some of the names now. Visual Vocations. There's a lot of day programs that are providing these services as well, but our own adult day healthcare circles, they are adapting, and they're taking folks with IDD.
Yeah, I know that the one that I worked at did have a couple, but the preference with the caveat with that is actually, it's if it's in the best interest for them, correct? The peer groups, if they're with, an older adult community and they're younger, they might not connect very well, but I know that their care is still the same. They still get into the program and receive the care, but I know that there was a couple other locations that were fully, focused on IDD groups.
Yes, and they're all vendorized, so meaning that the funds for this are provided through the regional center. So you can get a list of all those programs from the regional center. And the other thing is, I was just thinking about years ago, they started experimenting with this up in Brea at Easter Seals, which I think is now known as Imaginarium or something like that. I'm not remembering the current name, but they had a program up there for many years that was a combination of older adults and folks with Down syndrome, and they did very well. They intermingled and intersected quite well. So we know this can work.
Okay. Next question, where to get the reality animated stuffed animals?
You can get them on Amazon, and they're expensive. They're like $100+, but families are getting very good results with them. And I think you just put electronic pet companions in the search and you'll come up with different brands.
Let's see, if I suspect that my son with Down syndrome may have Alzheimer's, what kind of doctor should I take him to get for a diagnosis?
Yeah, I'd really love for you to call UCI Mind. And the number is here on your screen. It's 714-456-8443. And I'll let you know too that it's in the works. We're working on developing a brief screen, and maybe having some screening events in the future at the Down Syndrome Association, which is one of our fabulous partner organizations. But I think I would really like to encourage you to get involved early with UCI Mind. That would be, I think, what would be in yours. I think you said it was your son. Is it son or daughter? Yeah, son's
yeah.
best interest. Thank you.
All right. Speaking of UCI, will the UCI research program share medical test results with personal physicians?
I'm sure they do. I mean, that would be important. I'm gonna opt out of all medical questions, okay, since I'm, a non-medical person, but I'm sure that they will work in tandem with the primary care physician or pediatrician, whatever it is that, a lot of our Down syndrome folks have been seeing a pediatrician their whole life. So I'm sure that they do collaborate in that way.
Mhm. Let's see. Okay. I think you might have answered this. Most people with Down syndrome don't have enough funds to pay for assisted living or memory care. Does the regional center pay for care and housing?
Yes. Yes, they will cover a group home. Any kind of housing that is needed, it will be covered.
Okay. And again, what does IDD stand for?
It stands for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. So that could be autism, it could be Down syndrome, it could be a whole community of disorders.
Okay. Let's see. We have somebody that's actually working in a day program with people in the spectrum. So her question is, how do you comfort them when they're having a behavior that has to do with hallucinations, especially when they're stubborn on what they're seeing is real?
You are agreeing with what they are seeing. You are going to go along with that and you are going to say, I am not going to let that hurt you, whatever it is. Maybe they see, let's say that they see some men in the room. No offense to men, of course, but they perceive them as threatening. So I would be saying something like, I see them, but I am telling them to leave. Get out right now. Okay, I'm telling them to leave and I am here and I am not going to let anything happen to you because I love you. That's what I would say. And then I'd say, would you like to step into the kitchen with me? I'm going to make an ice cream sundae. Hopefully that will help too.
Okay, so is there any way to find out the Alzheimer's in advance for any person?
I'm not sure I understand, but are you, I think you're talking about like predicting it in your individual. The risk is so high that I just really want people to be screened by the time they're 40 rather than, just guessing or praying or, whatever. And I'm also going to say, and I didn't emphasize this in the program today, bring in all the preventative measures you can from early on. So exercise, healthy eating, I didn't emphasize that enough. Social engagement, cognitive stimulation, because that can mitigate the risk for dementia. But in the long run, I still want people to get a screening by the time they're 40. And watch for those early symptoms like sudden seizures where there were none in the past. Okay, Jasmine, anything else?
Doing a quick double check. Does social services have funds for elderly people with Alzheimer's who don't have IDD?
Okay, we don't fare so well there. Medicare covers, doctors and hospitalizations and, hopefully your medications, but the types of services that are needed for just strictly Alzheimer's or dementia are often private pay. There are some types of long-term care insurance. There are day centers that offer a sliding scale or perhaps some scholarships. Low-income people can qualify for Medi-Cal and get some of their services covered that way, but that's a very low bar. So for the average person with Alzheimer's, they or their family have to bear the costs. And certainly, that's certainly true with long-term care. Unless you're
Right.
talking about long-term care, Medi-Cal nursing home, which would only be appropriate for really late stage. I'm sorry.
Yes. I know that there are some assistance, like you're mentioning the grants, the CRC and regional center, sometimes they're very specific though.
Nothing like, what the regional center does for the IDD population, though, where basically everything is covered from the cradle to the grave.
Let's see. How can I quickly assess the family caregiver's assumptions and compare to my own assessment?
Say that again.
So, okay, I guess I'll just
Or reframe.
Yeah, in my experience as a service coordinator, the parents' reality ranges from being overly optimistic about their child's abilities to assuming that they can do anything and never or can't do anything.
Right.
And never will be able to. Most are pretty realistic though, but how can I quickly assess the family caregiver's assumptions and compare to my own assessment?
Yeah, well, I mean, you do your own assessment. And as I said, in dealing with families, you're respectful of them. And you don't want to hit them over the head with reality any more than you want to try and do it with the person they're caring for. And you're going to find people in all stages of denial or, some are very optimistic, some are pessimistic. We see that every day here, and we have to align ourselves with parents and with family members in order to work closely and effectively with them. And that includes not arguing with them. We don't argue with the people with dementia, and we don't argue with the families because some of them have some pretty set in stone ideas. We just make sure that our care of the loved one is following a good protocol. Does that make sense? Is there anything you'd add to that, Jasmine?
No. I think you answered that pretty well. Yeah.
There's a lot of pain in these diagnoses. I mean, people are in pain. And so I'm not going to argue with a family member when they say, oh, my loved one's getting better. For example, I know that's probably not true, but if it makes them feel better, it's good. So we just sort of work with families knowing that they're in pain. And with a Down syndrome family, look, y'all, I mean, they've been caring for this person, their whole life for maybe 50 years. And, now they've got Alzheimer's. So there's a lot of burden associated with this. And we see parents who are frequently ill themselves. They may have Alzheimer's themselves. We see parents pass away, and then the care of the person with IDD is relegated to a sibling. So that's a sudden change in their lives. So, people go through a lot in these illnesses, and we have to really walk side by side with them and approach them where they are in the illness, just like we do with the person with the illness.
Okay. So I think I've got most of the questions. There's a few statements here. Yes. So somebody was mentioning, the Reimagine, another center, and I was just thinking about that one. Yeah, it moved recently, I thought, to Santa Ana in the past year or so.
They have a fabulous center, and they are a fabulous resource. Reimagine used to be Easter Seals.
Yeah, the Alzheimer's Family Center, I guess, also has the Cal Compass grant. So they're also offering services, adult day health services It looks like for Down syndrome, Hispanic, and Asian communities.
That is absolutely fantastic. So again, that's the Alzheimer's Family Center in Huntington Beach. And they're actually a state designated center for Alzheimer's disease. That's all they do. And so that's a great referral. They do a wonderful job.
Let's see, there's another announcement about the Medi-Cal qualifications just changed last July. I was not aware of that actually. So it's saying it still doesn't cover assisted living, but might qualify for a SNF.
Okay, and here we're talking about the neurotypical population as compared to the IDD population. So yeah, maybe okay, I just want to say, like, you can apply for a waiver, you know, but you might be on that list for several years. So.
It looks like that is it.
Okay.
Oh, there is one question. I'm so sorry. Talking about getting a test when they're in their 50s. They're worried about their forgetfulness.
40s. Okay, now are we talking about Down syndrome, or are we talking about just someone is concerned about their memory?
Someone is concerned about their memory.
Okay, let's have them call our helpline, because we do provide memory screenings to the general public, and we can help you with that.
Can you move this slide to the helpline number?
Yes, of course. Yeah, so call our helpline, and we can do a screening even over the phone. I mean, over Zoom with you. But that's a first step. And if it turns out that you're falling outside of the expected range, then the next step would be to go to an assessment clinic like UCI Mind, or to a neurologist, etc. But we can guide people in that process. So thank you so much for your time and attention today, everyone, and for all the great questions that you asked. I wasn't really sure how this topic would be received, but it seems like it held people's attention, and I was very happy to have the opportunity to do this today. So thank you. And thank you to our sponsors, and thank you to Jasmine.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah. And yes, Michelle, thank you.
I started to say our technician, Michelle. Yeah.
Yes. Please watch for the survey that will open up immediately as you exit the webinar, and our flyer will be sent out on chronic mental illness and the risk for dementia. Feel free to forward it on to anyone else who might be interested. You will receive that in an email. Don't forget, you can visit our website also, alzoc.org, to learn more about our education programs and webinars. And you can view our recordings of past webinars for free. No CE credit though for viewing recordings. But thank you again for attending. Thank you so much. Have a great day.